I'm going to talk about the ethical aspects of trial matching solutions specifically. And as Ingrid said, by background, I'm a paediatrician, so I'm a clinician, but I also chair one of the National Health Service Research Ethics Committees in the United Kingdom. So can I have the next slide, please? So to start off with, I'd like to set out what I'm trying to do, trying to set out my stall. So if I could have the next slide. I think it's threefold. I'd like to stimulate my audience because ethics is not a monopoly of ethicists. I think that the best ethicists are the people who just help us think how to think about things. So I'd like to think that maybe this talk can just introduce some ideas on how to approach the subject, because the answers we have to come to ourselves, but I hope that maybe we can help each other. And the third point I'd like to do is, just as chair of a research ethics committee, and these proposals, research proposals would have to come through a research ethics committee, what might we see, or what might we deem as good ethical practice? What is a good model of trial matching? If I can have the next slide, please. As has been stated many times, we hope to gather views from the audience, and this is not a matter of transmitting the views of speakers into the notes of the audience. It's very much, what are your views? So please feel free to write the questions down. If I look at Slido at the end and I see that there are no questions, I will feel a failure. So I hope you can sympathize with me and write a question, even if it's just to make the speaker happy and feel that somebody has been listening. So could I then have the next slide, please? So I think what I want to do, where do I start? And I start very clearly, and on the next slide, with the proposal that research is good for us. Modern medicine, if we just take a step back and look at by century, modern medicine's success is based on research. It's based on empirical evidence to determine what is the best care. And the successes are there. That is a very simplistic view, but I think it's a start. If we take up the COVID pandemic, then, as previous speakers have said, research has come to the front, and it's evident that the population as a whole may be a bit more aware of what research is and are perhaps slightly more favorably disposed to it. And I've always been struck by a quote by the Indian author Andheri Roy, who, when talking about pandemics, said, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It's a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. I would say that little luggage should be our research methodology, our curiosity, how to approach the world, how to make it a better place. So I think I start from the position that research, and I would add, and I think you can quite readily, research as currently conducted and regulated is good for us. Can I have the next slide, please? So if that's the case, if trial matching is a means of helping people participate in research, is increasing research, I would argue that trial matching must be a good idea. But there's always a but. And if you just have the next, it's a good idea if. So what are those conditions, what we have to meet to ensure that trial matching meets our standards? In fact, I can have the next slide, please. I think we need to make sure that the process, the way in which we go about setting trial matching up, is fair. it may be a contentious issue, and there will be people who agree, there will be people who disagree with us. And even if the disagreeers are a minority, they can be a vociferous minority, and they can cause us difficulties. So if I can have the next slide, please. We must talk and listen to each other. Easier said than done usually, because we have our own views and we're in a hurry. We want to put everything through, and it takes time to stop, to sit down, to gather people around us, to hear what people say, to listen to them, and then talk this through. It takes time, but it's time well spent. So I think we must talk and listen to each other, and I could just have the next slide. I think you'll have a little sort of condition on that. We must talk and listen to each other from the beginning. We must make sure that we don't present people with the French expression of fait accompli. The people we talk to must feel they've been genuinely and honestly engaged in the process, and that their views matter to us. If I can have the next slide, please. We also need to talk openly and honestly. In this room, I suspect there are many people who have vested interests in this area of different shades and with different motivations. That's fine. I think that we can have competing interests, and we do have competing interests. That is part of life. That's part of getting on in life. What we need to make sure is that we ensure that those interests don't conflict. They may compete, but they shouldn't conflict, and we need to be honest with them. So we need to be able to say, this is why I think something, and to be up front to be able to recognize I may have a particular view because of my background or particular interests. So I think that we need to talk openly and honestly. If I can have the next slide, please. I think this is important. We need to look at all possibilities. If I'm slightly challenging, PharmaLedger is not the only solution. If it is presented as the only solution, people will rapidly realize that this is what one might describe as, well, we're just being told how to think or what to think. There are alternatives usually, and it is incumbent on us to say, well, what are those alternatives? And to evaluate them and to work out, well, we've chosen this particular pathway because we think it's the best alternative or the better alternative. It's not that there's no alternative, it's the better one. So we have our reasons for our course of action, but we have acknowledged that there may be others that we have to take into consideration. So I think it's important to make sure that we don't present people with, well, this is the answer, please just let's all get on with it. So could I have the next slide, please? So just in summary there, I think we need to ensure that any process is fair. We may not agree on the issue, but I think we can usually agree on how to approach it. And I put down two sort of models: accountability for reasonableness, a rather obscure title, but a list of criteria that represent fair discussion and fair decision making, and the other process of democratic deliberation. I suspect there are others, but those are two that I've picked up on. So if I can have the next slide, please. Then I would come on to, well, what about the matching itself? We've talked about the process for setting it up or establishing it. What about the matching itself? And I've just got a few slides here to sort of highlight key ethical points. And if I can have the next slide, please. I think any process, if we're looking at it from the ethics point of view, we're quite happy for a process that's easy to get into. And in fact, listening to the patients, that is exactly what people want. They want easy access, or they want easy access to information about research, treatment possibilities. But I think what's incumbent in, there needs to be an easy way out. So as this slide suggests, beware the lobster pot. Make sure that your proposal isn't a lobster pot in which the patients are trapped and then can't get out. And I think you will find that if it's clear for people up front that we would like you to join this, but it is possible to leave it very easily, it may frighten you to think, well, I want to keep them. I don't want to lose their data. But on the other hand, I think you'll find many people say, well, I'm not happy that I won't sign up. But if they know that they do have the option to pull out later, they will feel more well disposed to starting off by saying, yes, I will join this process. I will join this trial matching process. So something that's easy to get in, but also something that's easy to get out. Daunting for the trial matcher, but I think something that needs to be considered very seriously. If I could have the next slide, please. Much is talked about data access, and you can divide groups up into those who are liberal with their data and those who are conservative with their data. And I think that what came across from the patient's perspective is all the patients are individuals. What a surprisingly unoriginal remark, but they are all different, and we need to accommodate that. And I would propose that we can accommodate that by saying, well, let us layer data access and the data that's acquired, so that it starts off with very simple data whose the consequence of disclosure is going to make no difference, and actually people will be happy to release, and then move on steps of consent or whatever, however you like to do it, for allowing more and more complex, more and more detailed information to be collected. So I think layering access is important. And I think that in terms of data access and data usage, I have a unashamedly UK approach to this. I think that what we know as the Caldecott principles, espoused by Dame Fiona Caldecott's sort of committee, are an excellent guide on what we need to ensure when we handle data, or when we handle personal data. And if we add that to say that these initiatives would follow due legal precedent, due legal stipulation, I think that that would cover most bases, and would cover, certainly from the Ethics Committee's point of view, and probably satisfy most people. If I can have the next slide, please. Much is talked about the cyber divide. And if we set up trial matching, internet or e-based, will we find what people will find out about trials but be unable to access them because the trial isn't being conducted in their country? I think this is a genuine problem that needs to be considered. But I think what I would say is that we need to recognize it, but we need to handle it carefully. If we then say, well, because a minority can't gain access to these trials, we must level down and disadvantage a majority, I think that's the wrong way around. I think we should take this disadvantage and use it constructively and say, well, let us use it as an opportunity to level up, to improve our care. And it can be an impetus, and there's no greater sort of motivational group than patients. They are in some sense as prime movers, and if they see that they are not gaining access to trials, well, let's work with them to see how we can get around that problem, and how we can help people gain access, even if the trial isn't being conducted in their bailiwick. So I think we need to recognize the disadvantage, but I think we can handle it constructively to ensure that it's a force for good rather than a weight around our ankles, dragging us backwards. And if I can have the next slide, please. That's really where I'm going to conclude. Thank you very much for listening. What I would say, and if I can have the next slide, just to reiterate, please put your own ideas forward, put your questions, comments, criticisms, whatever you like in Slido. I've got a very thick skin, and I'd much rather have criticism and comments than nothing at all. So thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Hugh. That was very stimulating, and I think very much to the bottom of the issues that we have to consideration. Let me see what we have here as questions. So using enterprise DLT, the data ownership process, etc., for trials can be changed, but it requires understanding of DLTs. Is that challenge also tackled? Is that the question is whether this is really a question to you, or perhaps more to one of the PharmaLedger colleagues from a technical point of view?
I think I don't think I can speak very much from a technical point of view. I can speak from an ethics, from an ethics committee who has experience of trying to judge good practice. I think that I'd go back to that. There's nothing new in this world. There are principles that we should follow about data ownership, data usage, data access, and we need to make sure we follow them. And I think that that's what we would be looking for in any application that involves trial matching, and we would expect the trial matchers to follow due legislation. But no, I'm not a technical expert, so whether you wanted to pass that on to somebody else, please do.
And then the second comment from Kuhn was, we can't solve today's problems with yesterday's technology. I think that's absolutely correct. There was another question. Yes, please.
I don't agree with that.
No? Okay.
Technology can solve any problems. I mean, if it's wrong technology, we need to modify it. But I think yesterday's technology, let's say the wheel is a very effective instrument. The wheel was invented a long, long time ago, and it can still solve many problems of getting us around Oxford if you have two wheels and a bit of metal in between and a saddle you can sit on. So I think yesterday's technology is often the best technology.
Okay, something that we clearly have to consider, and difference of opinion. Excellent. Jean Magnon had another topic. Could pre-trial design matching or recruitment with patient involvement in real-world data evidence trial design be ethical, valid, and effective? Absolutely.
I think that the other side to this coin is getting people involved, as I said early on. Getting our patients and the people involved in the research design, which would include trial matching, is absolutely crucial. And it's great to see so many patient representatives here, because they are a force for good, and they are the people on the front line. They're the people who matter. So I think that yes, pre-trial involvement is a brilliant idea, ethical. And what I would like to say, I'm always on the lookout for somebody who can tell me that involving people in early design of trials saves money. I heard somewhere that AstraZeneca saved $5 million by involving people in their trial design because they improved recruitment and improved retention. But I never found the reference to that. But certainly trying to help prove that it's effective would be a fantastic step forward.
Yeah, I think a very fundamental approach of the whole patient engagement movement is to bring in patients early into the medicine, in the new treatment development process. So starting with the research questions, starting with a selection of drugs that get priority development attention, so to say. So the patient's voice all through the process, but especially in the early parts and of the trial and of the development are clearly most efficient. And I think there is meanwhile more and more evidence for that as well. Stephen, you have raised your hand, please.
Yeah, it's kind of to help out with answering Kuhn's question about using enterprise distributed ledger technology. And so he was asking, I think, what is our approach to that within PharmaLedger in terms of understanding DLT and how central is this to what we do within the use case. And all I was going to say is that we absolutely agree that DLT is the way that we need to manage a lot of these issues, and that it underpins all of what we're doing with the use case, which will be demonstrated shortly. underlying that, there is a whole work package, a whole group of people within PharmaLedger that are focused on making sure that the DLT component manages things like data privacy and access to data. And I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. So I'm afraid we need to stop here because we are really behind our schedule. We keep those questions and we try to address them perhaps also during the panel discussion. So I think it's time for polling. Brian, if you could provide us with the first question. Do you think that a broadly established trial matching platform will increase fairness of access to clinical trials in Europe? So if it's really what was said before, also in the patient discussion, if there were one place, so to say, to go, very well known, would that increase fairness of access to clinical trials in Europe? I think there's a clear majority who would say, yes, that would really help. So it's important also for fairness reasons that we find a good solution here that is really attractive and make things easy. Okay, next question, please. Do you think that a not-for-profit organization hosting the trial matching platform or solution would be preferred by patients over a commercial provider? So about 1/3 say, I don't think that it matters. About 2/3 come to the conclusion that a not-for-profit organization may be more, acceptable for patients when they are looking for a clinical trial. Okay, thank you very much.